You know all the details, though. Jack will make an opening statement, then we'll open it up to questions.
Thanks, Cal. Hey, listen, just want to say thanks to all of the media for being here. This is obviously a big time for us. It's hard to believe 40 years have passed since we were last together on the court. We are very excited as teammates about being together again here. We're looking forward to a lot of fun that we have scheduled this weekend. I first want to thank UK Athletic Department for all of their help in making this happen. They've been great working with us. They've been very open. They've been very willing to make this weekend as good a weekend as they can for us. So I just want to say thanks. Very quickly, Coach Hall will not be here, and I'm kind of trying to limit him, or we are, as to how much participation he will be asked to do this weekend. He's a little bit under the weather. He spent 4 or 5 hours in the emergency room within the last week. Just a cold, and I think he's okay now. When I talked to him today, he's feeling great, but you know, we want him at the game. We want him at a couple of our autograph sessions and that kind of stuff, so he won't be here. Coach Parsons, who was as vital to our success as Coach Hall in a lot of ways, more because we were able to like Coach Parsons as the assistant coach. There were times, I must admit, and I think you'll talk to all the players, and they backed me up, there were times we didn't necessarily like Coach Hall, and that was all right with Coach Hall. He liked it that way. So I'll finish up, and you can ask us questions, and once again, all the other guys are kind of positioned around the room.
Yeah, I wonder for you guys, how does it play on your minds that it's 40 years since the glory days? You want to go, Coach? You want me to? For me, you know, it's kind of like when you turn 60, when you think of that, it doesn't feel bad, but until somebody says it. And then when you hear somebody say you're 60 or it's 40 years since you guys won the championship, then it sounds like it's really been a long time. But on the other hand, you know, when you get together, you remember all those things that happened during the year, and it seems like it was just yesterday. So it's always great when we have a chance to reunite and spend some time together. So that's why we're looking so much forward to this weekend. Probably the other thing when it feels like it has been 40 years is the first thing each morning when you wake up.
When you guys look back on that title, what was probably the most satisfying aspect of that? Was it just finally getting it after having a couple of tries, or just, you know, more or less ending the drought, so to speak?
Well, for me, and I think that's a good question to ask all the guys if you interview them individually, but for me, it had been a very kind of a pressure-packed year for us. We were ranked #1 virtually every week of the season. We might have fallen to #2 once, but and along with that comes a lot of pressure. Now, I give the coaching staff a lot of credit for deflecting that and absorbing it all and kind of keeping us shielded from it, but there was a huge sigh of relief for me when we walked off the floor after winning it all. I think that relief that we had it again was huge.
Well, it made it interesting. I took this team through the preseason conditioning program, and not many schools had a weight program and conditioning the way we did it. It was really tough. And it was funny, Bill Kitely, Mr. Wildcat, he would always ask me after the pre-season conditioning program ended, said, what kind of team are we going to have? And you could determine exactly what kind of team we would have. I'll never forget this, but we were playing the Russian national team early in the season. We don't do that anymore. I had scouted them somewhere. It's been so long ago, I don't remember where it was, but the Russian national team was the best team from that they had a little short coach. Many of you would remember this guy. This was late in the game, and we absolutely had worn them out, which surprised me, it surprised Coach Hall. One point late in the game, he turned to me and said, well, should we substitute? And I said, Coach, these are the Russians. We're not going to substitute anybody until the final end. And James Lee, if you saw that game, most of you are too young to remember that, but James Lee dunked over their big center, and the big center runs back down the floor holding his hand. After the game, the coach for the Russian team made this comment, and it was in the paper, best team I ever looked. So I knew that we were going to be a pretty good basketball team at that point.
Kyle, the 78 team was known as a real big, physical, bruising type of team. You had James and Rick and Mike bang people around. But could you speak a little bit about the basketball smarts of that team? You guys were more than just a big bruising team.
Yeah, I think one of the strengths of that team not just was our physical, but the mental as well. Because we could play, we were so versatile, we could play so many different ways. Defensively, we were probably underrated. We were a pretty good defensive team. Offensively, we really didn't have a weakness, whether it was Truman, Jay coming in off the bench, outside, Tim Stevens subbing in. A lot of guys could shoot it from outside, although Coach Hall wouldn't, no. And we were, dominate teams on the inside. That was our first look, to always throw the ball inside. And then, demonstrated our tournament run was perfect as far as the way the team played, because it seemed like every game along the way to win the championship, somebody else had the best game. So whether it was Mike and Truman in the first, second game, once we got by Florida State, to Rick and Jack in the final game. I made some free throws in the Michigan State game. So, it just showed the versatility, but everybody got along so well. We're willing to sacrifice for the good of the team. And I think that was really the key, yeah. But mentally, we were all smart, knew how to play, and knew what we needed to do to win.
I'm sure you guys probably remember that season when LSU played here, and Coach Brown talked about the karate defense that you guys had. I was wondering for Jack, you and Kyle, could you talk about how that was probably like a sense of pride for Rick and James and Mike when he said that was probably the best. And then Dick was wondering if you could kind of remember how Coach Hall reacted to that, because I'm assuming he probably liked that too and took it as a compliment rather than a criticism.
Well, we were very physical. There's no question. Coach Parsons talked about our preseason training. It was the first time I'd ever lifted any weights. I didn't do any weightlifting until we got here. We had guys who, when I speak now, I say we had guys who liked to make the other team hurt. And I tell people we were real nice about it. If we knocked somebody down with a screen, we'd help them up and we'd pat them on the back. But everything kind of loosened up for us after that. And that's kind of the way we played. Rick set screens on people. Mike Phillips set screens on people. As far as LeVon and James, we tried to stop putting them in situations where they had to set screens because they really hurt people. But that's how we played, and we really enjoyed it. I really didn't know any other way to play. And it's kind of interesting because we learned that my freshman year for Rick and James, Mike Phillips and myself, who were seniors when we won it, we learned how to play that way, playing against IU and their undefeated teams. Scott May, Kent Benson, those kind of guys were physical. And I still remember that Indiana game. Rick was playing against Kent Benson. And Kent Benson, he beat Rick up. That was like our first road game. And he beat Rick up. And then the very next game, we played North Carolina with Mitch Kupchak. And that's the only game I've ever played where I felt sorry for a guy on the other team. Rick about killed Mitch Kupchak. So that's how we played since that time. It was a lot of fun, and it was our style, and we were proud of it.
Keep in mind, in '75, we were playing UCLA in San Diego, and Jack was a freshman, and Rick, and so we had those young guys, and their eyes were this big, of course, and just did not have the experience and know-how. In 77, we had a heck of a team. Maryland beat us in Cole Fieldhouse. In Maryland, there was just one issue. We didn't have this guy who
Right.
played the next year. I'll never forget playing Michigan State in Dayton. It was Dayton, right?
Yep.
This is late in the game. They foul Macy. It seems like 6, 7, or 8 times. He makes every one of them. Magic Johnson was a freshman then, and who won the NCAA the next year? Michigan State. So the big difference was we were the same team those 2 years. We just didn't have Kyle Macy with us.
I know it's hard to believe, but I hadn't lifted weights either before I got here. But I had been in the Big Ten for a year as a freshman, and it's known for a physical conference. And when I came down here, I remember some of the first practices. I thought, there's no way we'll have 5 guys left on the floor because we were fouling so much in practice. And we did drills. You didn't sit out any drills. I mean, we did the take a charge, dive for the ball, and the managers would beat the snot out of you with the football blocking dummies till you scored 3 times. You know, and it seemed like I always got matched up, take a charge on James or somebody that was, I was just hoping to survive the drill. So we didn't back away from any of that stuff, and I think because when we got in the game then, we were good to go. We'd practice as hard as any game we probably played in.
Something about Kyle, he loved to shoot free throws after practice. And on many occasions, I would throw them back to him, and I'd say, Kyle, you shoot until you miss. So he would start. He would get to 50 or 60, at 70, and I said, Kyle, I've got to go. I can't throw back. I don't have time. I've got to go home. Dinner's ready. So, and this is a gospel truth. He would stand there and make them as long as I would throw them back to him, and don't think that was not important in a big game.
Hi, Dick Gabriel, Kentucky
Hey, Dick.
Colonel.
How you doing?
Wondering if you guys ever look back on the run of games, and Coach Parsons just mentioned Magic Johnson. Johnson and Kelser in that one. Then you play Arkansas with the 3
Musketeers.
what do they call them? And then
Trip-
Duke's got
the triplets.
yeah, the triplets. All I mean, could you comment on just the level of competition there and the great players, some of the all-time greats you went up against? And then I've got a follow-up.
I get a film of Arkansas playing Memphis, and I would say this is the first time and only time that I was here at the University of Kentucky. We didn't show our players the film. In this particular game, Arkansas had made their first 14 shots in the game, and I told Coach Hall, I said, you know, I don't believe we ought to even look at this film. Arkansas was probably the more talented team. They just didn't know it. And so we did not look at a game film of Arkansas. And before the game started, officials made the comment that they were going to call the game close. And I remember saying, well, call it as close as you want to. We have 4 centers, so it's not going to affect us. And that's how they called it. Arkansas did get in foul trouble. You remember a play late in the game where we call it Rick. The 2 big guys rush up as if they're going to receive a pass. Jack Givens makes a screen and runs out for the long downfield pass. He catches it and scores. But you know the important thing about a pass like that, who the heck's going to throw it? You know who threw that pass? Kyle Macy.
Yeah. Yep.
And Coach Hall had said, should we run what we would call Rick as a Hail Mary pass? I said, this is a good time to win the game. And it was the most perfectly executed play that I can recall all through the tournament. And boy, that was a good feeling when Jack put the ball in the basket.
Some of you may not know, but Coach Parsons has been working with me as my publicity director for the past few years.
I can tell. But to add to the question about the competition that we faced on the way, you know, we faced something different in every game. The first game we played Florida State, and some of us seniors, some of us starters didn't play very well in the first half of that game. Coach Hall made a huge call to bench myself and I'm not throwing anybody else under the bus, but there are a couple other starters who didn't start that second half.
I
But
know Mike and I did.
yeah, okay, Rick and Truman. I wasn't going to say. I wasn't going to say. But Coach Hall decided to start James, and Fred Cowan, Dwayne Casey started in those 3 spots, I think it was. And our bench was tremendous, as they were all year. So they came in and they carried us the first part of the second half. Then Coach gave in and let us back in, and we came in and kind of cleaned things up. So that's one thing we faced. Mike Phillips up against Miami of Ohio. We played that game up in Ohio, and Mike was going home, and we beat those guys, and Mike was tremendous in that game. And then we played in Dayton, and we played Michigan State with Magic and Kelser and some of those kind of guys. And I look at that, and I'm just thankful that leading up to that time, we hardly faced anybody more difficult to play against than what we were facing in practice every day. Wouldn't you say that?
Yep.
I mean, our freshman year, my freshman year, we had Greavy and Guyett and Flynn and Jimmy Dan, and, we had G.J. Smith and all of those guys who knew how to play. And they beat us down, us young guys. They beat us every day. And then we kind of took a little step backwards for the first half of the season in our sophomore year before Macy messed us up by not coming and going to Purdue for a year, but that's a whole nother story. But we took a step back. We were a lot like this current team. We were struggling. We were 10-10 at one point. And we finally got to where we said, man, we better listen to Coach Hall, man, and get back to playing the way Coach wants us to play. So we learned how to handle adversity at that time. Our junior year, as Coach Parsons said, was, in my mind, our best team that we had, with Larry Johnson at the point guard. I mean, so, and then we had the bench, man. We had Levon, and we had Fred Cowan, we had Dwayne Casey, we had Tim Stevens, we had Jay Scheidler, we had all these guys in practice. Chuck Alexanis was a big 7-footer who we had to face every day in practice. So by the time we got to games, I mean, we had seen it all, and we didn't have to worry about it. We just played, and we were fortunate enough to be able to not so much have to worry about who we were playing against, but know from our experience that we could deal with everything we would face in a game.
Jack mentioned Fred Cowan. One day after a really difficult practice, Coach Hall was after Fred pretty well. Make a long story short, he left and went home. So I called Fred on the phone. I said, Fred, what are you doing? He said, Coach, I said, I'm coming to get you, and you be ready in 3 hours. He said, Coach, you don't have to come get me. I'm on my way back. I said, yeah, are you sure you're on your way back? He said, yes, I'll be there for practice tomorrow. I said, well, that's not the issue. He said, well, what is the issue? I said, the press is going to ask you why you left. And what are you going to tell them? And he said, well, what should I say? I said, Fred, get back here just as quick as you can and just tell them you wanted to go rabbit hunting. So the next day in the paper, Fred had talked to the press, and those were his exact words. He said, I really just got tired and wanted to go rabbit hunting.
That's great.
Yeah,
Any more?
I didn't look up all of your games, but I don't know that you ever came close to the 41 you got in the championship game. Can you walk us through what that game was like and what you were feeling, why it turned out the way it did?
Well, yeah, no, 41 was the most. I had 35 and around in there at times, but yeah. Well, it was, it started out, I wasn't making shots early in that game, as a matter of fact, and was nervous. I didn't know until I watched the game way later. I'm talking about years later. I watched the replay of the game and realized I scored the last 16 points of the first half. I mean, I had no clue about that. I just knew that I got on a little bit of a roll. And then we all thought that Duke would make some changes and come out different in the second half, and they just never did. And once again, that's one of the great things about playing with the guys we had on the team and watching our march through the up to the championship. we had different people hot at every game, and what we did as veterans and as a team, we made sure whoever was hot got the ball. That person got the ball. That's just the way we played. We had played that way all year. So they realized I was hot, probably before I realized I was hot, and Coach Hall just kept running the same old plays over and over again, and we kept getting shots, and, you know, I was fortunate to make some shots that night. That was my night. But it could easily have been anybody else, depending on what defense we played. But it was a special night. It was obviously a great way to go out. Winning the championship first and then playing well was really nice. But I give a lot of credit to the coaching staff and to the guys I played with.
Well, Jack, you remembered, Mace, as well, that Duke was playing a 2-3 zone.
Right.
And Jack was working the baseline. In fact, he banked one in from the baseline. You won't ever see that happen again. It just skimmed the backboard and went in the basket. So we finally decided, well, let's flash him to the middle. So Jack would flash into the middle from the baseline, and Kaminsky, the big guy in the middle, wouldn't come out and take him. It was like, well, I dare you to make it. Well, he started making them, and any way he could get into the middle, we'd get him the ball, and he just continued to put the ball in the basket. I don't remember how many shots he did take, or 27? How many did he make?
18.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it seemed like every one of them was going in, and you talk about a good feeling to see that happening. And Duke never made an adjustment, never changed, and never did come up and take Jack. They just backed off and said, okay, if you can make it, shoot it.
And I'm still sending them checks, by the way, donating to the Duke Athletic Fund.
My question has always been, they wouldn't come up on the baseline because of Rick and Mike.
Mm-hmm.
And they really respected our outside shots, so
Right.
the two guys out front really extended, so that left that open. But if Jack scored 18 field goals, and I'm the one handling the ball, hitting him in the middle, because we didn't run any offense, we just passed to Jack, how come I didn't have more assists? I'm just kidding.
Hey, I appreciate you, man.
They never made that adjustment, and we had all kind of zone offenses, but as soon as we saw that Jack had the hot hand, we just stopped everything we were doing.
Well, keep in mind, this team was shooting over 50% as an average for the entire year. I can't recall if it was 54%. It could have been 53, 52. Maybe you can find it, but boy, they could put the ball in the basket. You talk about good shooting guards, Scheidler and Clater and Mace, and then we had good shooting from the wing. And you throw it into Roby, he had the sweetest jump hook on earth. Hagan mentioned recently that no one, of course, would hook it the way he did, although Johnny Cox could hook it from down on the baseline. But Rick had a great jump hook, and Mike Phillips would just catch it. He was just as round as that table. When he caught the ball, he just turned and put it in the basket. Had great hands, bank it in, and you couldn't move him. He was a lot like Barkley. Once he caught it, he was going to put it in the basket.
And by the way, I will say about Mike, this is one of the first times, you know, we've been together without Mike. And we missed the big fella. His wife will be here to represent him and his son. You know, we're sorry, obviously, that Mike's not going to be able to be with us physically. You know, we loved all of our teammates, and it's just sad that an accident took him from us way too soon. But we'll remember Mike, and we appreciate everything that he did for our team. There's no question about that.
You know,
He's here, yeah.
one other thing, too, about this team, it was, I think, the last championship team where you could actually go out in the state and play your scrimmage games. So the fans in the eastern part of the state or wherever we went could firsthand in their own home environment. I think that was real important to the fans, the way they really kind of took hold of this team, and maybe that's why 40 years later they still remember. And, you know, we've talked about the seniors, but to have then the final basket by James on a slam dunk running over a guy was kind of fitting, as well as for the...
He never ran over anybody on that dunk.
Well, I mean, that was, you know, but for him as well as the other three
That's
seniors
awesome.
to go out because of all they'd accomplished in their UK career, it was just, as an underclassman, we were real happy for them to go out that way. So it was great.
you've probably heard that Louisville's 2013 title was vacated recently. So I was wondering what your guys' reaction would be if your 1978 title happened to be vacated for some reason.
Well, it wouldn't be good, obviously, and just like it's not good for U of L. You know, I know for the fans, particularly some Kentucky fans, that's they find joy in that that situation and the fact that they've had that stripped. I know a lot of the former Louisville players. I'm talking about from way back: Scooter and Rodney and Griff and Robbie Valentine and Jerry Eves. I know all of those guys, and I know they are as proud of their school and their program as we are of our program at the University of Kentucky. You know, personally, I just really hate that whole situation for the school. I think they will eventually overcome it. I don't know how long it'll set them back, but to answer your question direct, we wouldn't want it. We did everything we could to stay above board and to do things the right way. Our coaching staff demanded that. Our coaching staff demanded that. We just, I feel bad for them. I hope they find a way to overcome it. And I guess that kind of answers the question as far as I'm concerned. You all might want to throw something in there.
I don't really have any comments. It's, you know, dealing in the what ifs, which is, it won't happen for us. I don't think we really need to worry about that.
Mm-hmm. There's one other thing about rules for teams. We really had two rules. One, you had to eat breakfast. Number two, you had to go to class. If you did miss a class, I didn't make that decision. You made it as a player. We would run at 4 a.m. the next morning. And I won't mention any names.
Jay, we're not talking about you, Jay.
Not talking about Jay.
His head sure snapped up there, didn't it?
But once you stretch and run at 4 a.m. in the morning, you don't have any problems for 2 weeks. And but those are the only rules we had. We didn't have to say very much to these guys. They were older, mature, knew what they wanted. Of course, to win an NCAA title, you have to have two things. You have to be good and you have to be lucky. And that's always been true. Mm-hmm. Any team that wins it, somewhere along the way, they almost faltered but pulled it out, and then that ended up with success.
You might, I don't know how much more time we have, but you might want to get some of the other guys around the room.
Definitely get some of the other guys.
Yeah, we're going to make the whole team available. So if some of you can go ahead and sit at some of the tables, and then we have actually backdrops in the back area too for enough room to spread out. And we'll use the next 20 minutes. We'll break you up in time for us to take our group photo on the court. Thank you.